Welcome to your weekly space of self-indulgence, discovery, and community. I'm your host, Mariah, here to guide you through insights, tips, and stories. Thanks for joining me. Now let's get started. Welcome back to the Self-Indulgent Podcast. I am your host, Mariah. Today, we are talking about self-sabotage. I touched on this a little bit in my last video of in the winter, even more specifically in that season for me. I tend to fall into those types of behaviors, and then it's kind of hard for me to pull myself out. And we'll get into more of what some of those behaviors might look like. So this topic is very personal to me. I really have strong feelings about the topic of self-sabotage or self-destructive behaviors. I've definitely fought with it all my life, and there's so many reasons why I think I do it, and it really kind of just depends on the context, but I will get into more of that later. What was really interesting about this topic was that when I searched self-sabotage for just a definition, it's not its own definition, at least not where I could access on any of the dictionaries. First came sabotage is what actually comes up when I Google with a definition from a actual dictionary. But for sabotage, what came up, the definition is to deliberately destroy, damage, or obstruct something, especially for political or military advantage. And then I did find dictionary.com's definition of sabotage, which is to behave, especially habitually or compulsively, in a way that interferes directly with one's own goals, well-being, relationships, etc. For me, to habitually and compulsively interfere with my own goals and growth has created so much shame and guilt. So much shame and guilt, inside myself. Habitual and compulsive, that description of the behaviors really hits home for me because that's what it is. That's how it feels. It's cyclical, there's a pattern, and yet I have no control. It's still very impulsive, compulsive, zero control, even knowing the cycle and the patterns. I will relinquish all control to the compulsion, the impulse, even when I actively, so not even subconscious, I actively know when I am going against myself and my goals and desires. And then I do it anyway. And then there's immediate regret, then the shame and the guilt, and it hits so hard, after doing whatever the behavior is. So this is something that I am actively still working through with y'all. This is something that is a current issue and part of the reason why it has come up as a topic. So I'm working and learning with y'all. So some common self-sabotaging behaviors can include procrastination, self-medication, so drugs, alcohol, comfort eating, and then even forms of self-harm or self-injury. So some of those feel very heavy. There are definitely many other ways that people can self-sabotage that maybe aren't as heavy as those. So to sum it all up, it's really just any action or inaction that damages one's own well-being. My forms are comfort eating for sure, procrastination, and just self-doubt. Overthinking and talking myself out of things is definitely a form of self-sabotage for me, because I will actively sit there, overthink, and then either talk myself out of or into something that does not align with my goals and values. So, according to Psychology Today, it can be more subtle, a combination of dysfunctional, distorted beliefs that lead people to underestimate their own abilities, suppress their feelings, or even just lash out at other people. So, for example, self-doubt. That definitely can create a distorted belief, making me think that I'm incapable, suppressing all of those negative feelings, and then potentially snapping and taking it out on people around me, and then not being able to hear from people who actually care about me, and then not accepting help. These are all ways that we can end up in the self-sabotage area. We can also self-sabotage when it comes to relationships, perfectionism, finances, time, change, and then we do it for a variety of reasons. It could be low self-esteem, not feeling like you're worthy of something better, and then we keep ourselves where we are. There's could be issues with cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is the discomfort that somebody feels when their behavior or experience does not align with the values or beliefs that they have. And so this would definitely create like a resistance to change, a resistance to growth that you might need to actually reach something that you do want. However, the change and growth can be really uncomfy depending on what it is. So we can self-sabotage because we would rather stick to what we know because that's what's comfortable. So Dr. Judy Joy wrote a book, and it's on my list. I have not read it yet, called Stop Self-Sabotage, and it came out in 2019. But she does explain how like self-destructive behaviors have a biological component to it. She says that we actually do get like a dopamine hit, or just like, you know, the reward feeling system in the brain when we set goals. So think about New Year's revolution times. Everybody's on a high. They're doing the things. And that is because like setting goals like actually can release that dopamine hit. But then when it gets time to do it, the fear of failure triggers avoidant behaviors. And so in order to avoid whatever the threat is, we start to shy away from our goals. She calls this the approach avoidance conflict. So I thought that was really interesting because I think like there are ways that I understand self-sabotage and maybe why I might be engaging in certain behaviors. A lot of it is to do what I think is comfortable in the moment and what feels good in the moment. But I think it's interesting that I think it's almost, you know, like feeling like you set yourself up for failure. Like you are so excited about something when you first have the idea, you set the goals. So to know that there's actually like a reason why it felt so good, and then also a reason why we're not following through, especially if it's going to require delayed gratification. It gets harder and harder to get used to waiting for gratification, especially when you're feeling uncomfortable through the journey. Hence, self-sabotage. So I want to talk about self-sabotage specifically as it relates to women, and then specifically Black women. And before I get into that, there's this quote from Helene Lerner. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. They're a women's advocate, and she says we have the power inside to be great, but oftentimes it's covered by false beliefs and about ourselves. And I don't know, this really hit home for me because I can't tell you how many times like somebody will compliment me or like give some sort of recognition of like how far I've come and all the things that I'm doing and stuff like that. And I just don't feel it. Like I don't feel connected to that. I don't see it that way. I think part of that disconnect is coming from like that piece of the quote where she said false beliefs about ourselves. That kind of can ruin things. Given some of those compliments or recognition, like I still can't help but think about the ways I'm not showing up, the ways that I don't stick to what I say and the goals that I have, that I know I could do better. And then it makes me feel like a fraud, an imposter, undeserving. And so if that's how I feel, of course, some of my behaviors aren't going to align with these higher version of myself or whatever the next version of myself that I'm trying to evolve into. With all that being said, there's a whole nother aspect to this aside from just like the way we feel about ourselves and how that contributes to self-sabotaging behaviors or self-destructive behaviors. But I also can't, and a lot of that comes from like how we're feeling about ourselves, right? So I can't ignore like the societal implications on women and Black women that are contributing to the way we're viewing ourselves, that contribute to the destructive behaviors. It's no surprise that society, white supremacy, the patriarchy devalues women, period. Especially women of color, and more especially Black women. Of course, some of the reasons we aren't reaching our goals because of the clear blocks or sabotage from the men in charge, the white men at the top of it all, the systems in place, the institutions. They're working the way they're meant to work. We have these blocks and sabotage made by white men in the workplace, in the education system, even just being blocked from basic human needs. And more. But okay, so aside from just that, and that, that's clear, evident, we know this, those are very clear ways to talk about how like this world just does not make it accessible for people of color and Black women to succeed. They make it very hard, damn near impossible. But I also think that there are more deep-seated effects that lead to self-sabotaging behaviors and self-destructive behaviors because of that stuff. So according to Psychology Today, women in general often self-sabotage because of underlying self-doubt, complying with the old rules. I put quotes around that if you're just listening to this and not watching. And worrying about image or reputation. Like those are the big three from that article in particular on self-sabotage in women. So I want to talk first about complying with old rules, right? And so the article was talking about how self-sabotage might be the safest option for women, especially when people pleasing and getting stuck in the rules that may no longer serve us. Self-sabotage might be the safest option for women, especially when they're getting stuck in people pleasing or they're getting stuck in roles that no longer serve them or just never serve them in the first place. Women are supposed to be compliant. And because of this way that women are raised in society, we're already by nature conforming and doing things that are probably against our true being just from jump, right? So that's already setting ourselves up for this pattern of just not honoring ourselves. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a different topic. I'm going to talk more about this as it applies to Black women a little bit later. And so then the worrying about image or reputation, my fellow people pleasers. This could be part of it. When I think about the ways that I don't often think about, I'm worried about my image or reputation. But when I do think about people pleasing, I can see where that aligns. That is something I'm worried about. As much as I've maybe found more comfort in who I am, what I stand for, all those things, I'm still worried about image. At the end of the day, I think too hard about how I respond to people sometimes, especially in the professional white spaces that's image and reputation. That's part of that. That's a worry. That's a fear. How do I maneuver these spaces, right? And then you have, the people pleasers, the nice girl. And there's nothing wrong with being nice, wanting to please others, being compassionate or genuine. But oftentimes for women, it requires self-sacrifice. Why? I don't know. No, well, I do know. Again, patriarchy. But that's what it includes for whatever reason. That piece of doing those things comes with self-sacrifice. We should not have to sacrifice ourselves just to keep the peace, just to please others, especially for Black women who have to sacrifice themselves every day to have a fighting chance in the world, right? It is there is no choice. For Black women, self-sacrifice is ingrained. It is almost a requirement to be able to exist in this world. And that is the sad reality. I'm saying we shouldn't have to sacrifice ourselves just to keep the peace, just to keep pleasing others, as a woman. And that is a privilege, because to be able to exist in that way, because I do think that for Black women, it is different, and we have to do it every day to be afforded the same opportunities, period. And to have a fighting chance in this world, like, so what are we doing? We're code switching, worrying about being portrayed as the angry Black woman just for giving an opinion or being stern or assertive, constantly having to appease white people in the room just to be given the same, hopefully, opportunities and just to have a chance to be in the same room as that are having important conversations that we want to be a part of, hoping to be taken seriously, working overtime, becoming superwoman just to be taken seriously and pray for the same opportunities as our white colleagues. This is exhausting. It can create procrastination, perfectionism that not only sabotage our performance in the day-to-day, but also the relationship with ourselves, our beliefs about what we can do. It affects our ability to dream, to demand better, and to demand more. Which then brings me back to underlying self-doubt. Everyone struggles with self-doubt at one point or another. Like, I don't care if you're the star basketball player, the movie star, the beloved artist, like the manager at Target. Everybody got some sort of self-doubt. For women, I think it runs really deep in our core. Like, we just lost reproductive rights. We have been told for centuries that we are not capable of making decisions for ourselves. Not about our bodies, not to be able to vote for our leaders, we can't decide to leave abusive marriages. Like, we've changed some of these milestones in history and we're reverting backwards in some of these, milestones in history. However, at the end of the day, we weren't afforded any decision-making abilities, like, for centuries. Like, that runs deep. And we are still seeing these attitudes today that believe that women are not capable. Women cannot make decisions. Women cannot do the hard things, right? Like, this is why we have not yet seen a female president. Like, come on. I think this is why self-doubt runs so deep for women to the point of self-sabotage. And then for Black women, everything I just said times 1,000, and then throw slavery on top of that. Like, Black women are still being told they are not enough, whether that's from our country, the world, the workplace, our own communities, Black men, and other women. So no wonder we're tired. For us, it feels like often, why even try? That's the truth of it. Like, that toxic positivity, you could take it somewhere else. I'm never going to sit here and tell people not to try, right? I always want people to try. I'm fighting for change, difference, and just, at least from the root of it, like, better relationships with ourselves. That's part of the reason why this podcast exists. Because if I'm good with me, that is first and foremost the most important relationship that I have is with myself. Because at the end of the day, that is who we have. And obviously I talk about community and why that's so important. And also smiling through all this and just trying again and again is like, sometimes it's not enough. It's not enough. It doesn't feel possible sometimes to keep going. When it feels like the world hates Black women, not everybody wants to fight back. Do more. Because we know that we're always going to have to do more to get the same opportunities and achievements and advancement and success. There's a book called Self-Care for Black Women: Overcome Self-Sabotage, Boost Confidence, and Celebrate Who You Naturally Are. That is also on my list. I haven't read it yet. So if this resonates with you or is of interest to you, like a lot of this stuff, then I think maybe giving that book a shot might be worth it. I just think that self-sabotage for Black women looks different. It's a little more to it than just these destructive behaviors or these behaviors that are blocking myself when there's already so much outside force that is determined to block my success our success. And like everything I'm saying here can resonate with you, but like regardless, that's how I feel about it. Stephanie Perry has a YouTube video called 7 Ways Black Women Sabotage Ease. And so I didn't watch the full video, but I did see this piece about like struggling in silence. And so like these are just some ways on which I'm like thinking about self-sabotage and how that might look for black women specifically. And so I saw part of the title, which was struggling in silence, and I started thinking about some of like my friends' experiences and my experiences. Like I've noticed that there's this like we just stopped talking about our issues, our struggles, what we really are sitting with. Like, yeah, I talk to my like girlfriends. Like I'm at a point sometimes where it's like it's just better for me to just sit with it myself, analyze it, or just deal with it by myself. And I like don't feel like trying to explain it to other people or just like even just ask for help. Like, and so I'm wondering if that comes from being misunderstood, being tired of explaining myself to people when I shouldn't have to. And I know that what I'm saying is not a hard concept to understand. Like, it's just not like, it just feels like sometimes people choose ignorance. Like they don't want to understand. I'm tired of playing defense, a position that I didn't even take willingly, but was forced upon me by the opposition. Like, I don't walk into things wanting playing defense. Like, why am I defending myself? Like, why do I have to defend myself constantly? Like, how am I in this position that was placed on me? And the more we move in silence about our struggles and everything we're experiencing, the worse our mental health can get and our physical health. It's like this form of self-sabotage, but the fucked up part about it is that it came through protection. Like this silencing of the struggles and just being tired and carrying things on our own. Like a lot of the times it comes out of protecting ourselves, right? But then it's just like we're carrying so much. We already got enough to carry. We lose so much in this world as Black women that it's so important to find our spaces where we can be our authentic selves and just loved unconditionally. I think that is why sisterhood is so important to us, and it's a topic that comes up often and that is deep to us. It literally can be a lifeline. I also think about how we're forced into identities and ways of being that may not actually align with who we are at the core. I think this is why like shadow work and inner child work is appealing to a lot of people. It's like because we're then reconnecting to pieces of ourselves that existed before we understood how this world actually works, how this world actually feels about us, and before we constricted ourselves into those limiting identities, roles, and characteristics. It's so important, I think, to be able to connect to that version of yourself before all of the pain, all of the painful experiences, and just like what actually speaks to you before all of the input. And you may not have to do like inner child work or anything like that to like connect to that, but that is one way, because to be assigned a role and to be boxed in and to sit in that could be seen as a form of self-sabotage, because you know it's stopping us from this level of well-being or part of our highest potential, but it's also just like because of the system. So it's like, well, can we actually self-sabotage at this point? You know, like how much of it is like actual self-sabotage and how much of it is just like the effects of the world that we're living in, how it makes us feel, and then the implications of that, and how do we fight back? How do we get out of that? Do we want to? Yeah, so that is all I have right now on this topic. There's so much more I want to think about when it comes to all of these things. So like if you like this episode, if stuff came up for you, if you disagree with some of the things that I kind of brought to the table, I would love like for you to comment down below so we continue the conversation. I would love to hear more perspectives, different perspectives, those it really resonated with. If there's something that you feel like was missing from the conversation, because there definitely was. And yeah, I would love to do another part to something like this kind of realm of things, if, depending on like how the conversation goes and if you guys really are feeling it. So I always end with a reflection question. So I guess my reflection question for this episode is, how does self-sabotage show up in your life? If it does at all, if you think it does at all, had there ever been a time self-sabotage played a major role in kind of where you're at? What does that mean to you? And yeah, anybody who's willing to kind of share some of this stuff down below, I'd love to talk more about it. For me, I'm definitely a comfort eater. I don't think I got too deep into like my self-sabotaging behaviors, but there's definitely comfort eating and overeating that is a self-sabotaging comfort coping issue that I have. I also, I think even just that overthinking and self-doubt piece, and like, I often do not allow myself to learn, to try again, to do better. And that's part of the reason why I think, and that stops me from growth. It really does. I'm trying to learn to be a student again. Like, I want to be a lifelong learner, but that just also means that I'm going to have to get comfortable with discomfort and mistakes. And I just have to do things. And I've talked about this in other episodes too. Like, I just have to do it and have a really tight support system and filter out through all the noise and sound of the world. And so that's kind of where I'm at with it, and can talk more about it if it's of interest. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Rate, download the episode. It really helps more than you know. Share this with somebody who you feel like needed to hear this. Don't forget to check out some of my other episodes. If you liked this episode, you will probably like my video on how to get out of a rut. Talk about some of those patterns of behaviors and how to kind of fight against that. Thanks again, and have a blessed and intentional week.